He never imagined his birthday would turn into the worst nightmare of his life. Based on real events, David had always been a dedicated and hardworking man, his heart full of simple dreams. His life revolved around his family, his wife Emma and his brother Michael, with whom he shared days filled with laughter and plans. Emma was sweet and charming, with a smile that seemed to light up any room. David admired her and trusted her completely, believing their relationship was unbreakable. Michael, for his part, was fun and charismatic, always surrounded by friends and with a playful spirit that brightened any moment. David saw him as a brother and inseparable friend. Weekends were filled with games, conversations, and small adventures. It seemed nothing could alter the family's harmony, and David felt fortunate to have them close. However, some small signs were starting to worry him. Quick glances between Emma and Michael, subtle gestures he couldn't quite understand, and secrets that seemed bigger than they appeared. David tried to ignore these feelings, thinking they were his imagination. But a small unease was starting to grow inside him, like a whisper warning that something wasn't quite right. Still, daily life continued with laughter and hugs, and David kept trusting his family. The shadow of doubt was barely perceptible, but enough for tension to begin weaving silently. Life seemed peaceful, but small details began catching David's attention. Deleted messages and conversations that stopped as soon as he approached generated a slight discomfort he couldn't completely ignore. Emma spoke enthusiastically about the birthday party preparations, but her gaze sometimes drifted toward Michael in a way that didn't go unnoticed by David. Michael, always cheerful, seemed more nervous than usual. His jokes now had uncomfortable pauses and smiles that didn't reach his eyes. David was beginning to notice that something was changing in the dynamic he knew so well. During meals and conversations, small tensions emerged, laughter that was interrupted, gestures that seemed to hide something, and sudden silences that didn't match the usual joy. David felt that something was brewing, though he couldn't put exact words to his intuition. There were clues, but nothing concrete. The shadow of doubt was there, growing slowly. He tried to distract himself with friends and work, but every gesture between Emma and Michael awakened his curiosity. His mind sought normal explanations, but a persistent worry was beginning to settle in his heart. The birthday preparation was approaching, and with each detail, David felt that something in the air was different. The apparent harmony hid secrets he couldn't yet discover, but that would soon alter his world. The days before the birthday were full of small incidents, interrupted laughter, complicit glances, and gestures that seemed like secrets between Emma and Michael. Nothing was obvious, but the feeling that something was wrong was growing. David was starting to notice details he'd ignored before, strange coincidences, messages that instantly deleted, and subtle changes in his family's behavior. Although he didn't completely understand what was happening, a silent tension kept him alert. Every gesture between Emma and Michael was a small reminder that his life's perfection might not be real. Still, David continued trusting them. The doubts were small, almost imperceptible, but intuition told him he should pay attention, that something big was brewing. While decorating the house and preparing the birthday details, David felt a mixture of excitement and strange worry. The happiness of the approaching day was tinged with uncertainty. Every forced smile, every diverted look, was like a thread slowly weaving a mystery around his family. David was beginning to sense that the upcoming celebration would be more than just a birthday. The shadow of doubt remained, discreet but constant. David didn't know it yet, but his birthday would be the stage where all the lies and secrets he'd begun to notice would come to light. David was excited about his birthday. He had planned a small gathering with friends and family in Amsterdam, making sure everything was perfect: music, food, and decorations. However, something in the atmosphere made him feel uneasy. Emma moved among the preparations with a smile, but David noticed a couple of strange gestures that made him frown. Small glances toward Michael and discreet laughs that didn't quite convince him. Michael seemed more nervous than usual, arranging things and making comments that sometimes cut off abruptly. David felt a small tingle of doubt, though he tried to convince himself it was his imagination. Friends began arriving, and the house filled with laughter and hugs. Every greeting was warm, but David couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing behind the smiles. While reviewing the final details, David remembered recent moments that had seemed trivial, but now took on a strange meaning: deleted messages, avoided gestures, and furtive glances between Emma and Michael. He tried to stay calm, focusing on the celebration and his guests, but tension was growing inside him. Something in the family dynamic was no longer natural, and every small gesture alerted him. David took a deep breath, determined to enjoy the party, but with his mind alert to any detail. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but intuition told him something would change forever that day. During lunch, David was watching Emma and Michael more than usual. Their shared laughter, their gestures, and their comments seemed more coordinated than should be normal. At one moment, David noticed both were exchanging messages with quick glances he didn't understand. His heart began beating faster. Doubt was beginning to settle more concretely. Still, he tried not to think badly. Perhaps they were coincidences or private jokes he didn't understand. However, the tension in the room was becoming increasingly palpable. The guests began singing and applauding for the birthday. David smiled and thanked them for the hugs, but in his mind, he couldn't stop analyzing every gesture of his wife and brother. Every comment, every gesture, every look seemed to hide something. Suspicion was slowly filtering in, like an invisible thread threatening to unravel the happiness of that day. David noticed that Emma and Michael's conversation stopped when he approached, and that sometimes they threw quick, almost imperceptible glances that raised more questions than answers. The tension was growing in the atmosphere, and David felt his birthday, which should be a day of joy, was about to become a decisive moment. Something big was brewing, and he sensed it even though he couldn't quite see it yet. David placed the last decorations and adjusted the music, trying to maintain the appearance of normalcy. However, his instinct told him something would happen soon. He watched Emma and Michael as they interacted with the guests. Small gestures, shared laughter, and brief comments seemed to coordinate suspiciously, making David feel increasingly alert. The guests began grouping together to sing "Happy Birthday," and the emotion in the room was evident. David breathed deeply, preparing for what he sensed would be a day that would change everything. Every movement by Emma and Michael increased the tension inside him. Suspicion was now more concrete, though the truth remained hidden. David decided to observe and wait. He knew something was about to happen, and that he needed to be ready to face it firmly when the truth finally revealed itself. The mixture of superficial joy and invisible tension made every second seem eternal. David knew his birthday wouldn't be like previous ones. Something was about to explode. With every breath, his heart beat with anticipation. The party, the guests, and the celebration had become the backdrop for a moment that would define everyone's life. David breathed deeply and stood before all the guests, his gaze fixed on Emma and Michael. The room's murmur immediately stopped, as if everyone sensed something serious was about to happen. In a firm voice, he began to speak. "Today is my birthday, but not everything we're celebrating here is happiness. There are secrets I can no longer ignore." His heart was pounding, but he maintained the calm necessary to face the situation. Emma and Michael exchanged nervous glances, trying to hide, but David perceived the coldness behind their smiles. Every evasive gesture was another proof of their guilt. He took out his phone and showed messages and conversations he had discovered in recent days. Every piece of evidence was a direct blow to the lie they had woven. The guests fell silent, watching in disbelief. Some covered their mouths, others took a step back. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. The party had transformed into a scene of confrontation. David pointed at Emma. "I thought I could trust you, that our relationship was sincere. But the truth is this." And he showed a message where her betrayal was clearly evident. Emma's gaze filled with guilt and fear, while the guests began understanding the magnitude of the deception. David didn't look away from either her or Michael. The betrayal was completely exposed. Michael tried to speak, seeking to justify his actions, but David interrupted him with a firm voice. "I don't want excuses. Every word you said and every action you took have shown me the truth." Disbelief and shame drew on Michael's face. All the guests could see that David wasn't willing to allow any more lies. Emma tried to approach, pleading with empty words, but David maintained his distance, making clear the betrayal couldn't be ignored or forgiven at that moment. Every message, every piece of evidence David showed, increased the tension. The guests' murmurs grew, and the room filled with a heavy, electric silence, as if the air itself contained the truth. David continued showing evidence, pointing to conversations between Emma and Michael that confirmed the secret relationship. Shame and remorse were visible on their faces, unable to hide what had been discovered. Friends and family watched with dismay, some trying to intervene, others simply observing the impact of the exposure. Every gesture by David showed the mixture of pain and determination that accompanied him. Finally, David breathed deeply and said, "Today, everyone has seen the truth. This celebration is no longer just a birthday. It's the day when the lie was exposed before everyone." The reaction was immediate. Some guests approached to hug David, showing support and solidarity. Others remained silent, processing the impact of what they had just witnessed. Emma stood paralyzed, unable to face David's gaze. Michael lowered his head, completely defeated by the public exposure of his betrayal. David felt a mixture of relief and pain. He had achieved the impossible, confronting the betrayal before everyone and recovering his truth, even if it meant losing the people he loved most. The party that should have been joyful turned into a moment of reflection and shock. David understood that trust had been broken and that the celebration would mark a before and after in his life. Some guests tried to talk with Emma and Michael, but David made a gesture, making clear that responsibility and explanations remained solely between them. As murmurs traveled through the room, David sat for a moment, breathing deeply. The tension was slowly decreasing, but the emotion of the exposure continued vibrating in the air. Although the pain was intense, David felt he had gained something invaluable: the certainty of truth, the strength to face betrayal, and the dignity of doing it before everyone. His birthday had become a breaking point, and his life would never be the same. Emma tried to approach, tears in her eyes, seeking apologies that sounded empty before the magnitude of her betrayal. David stopped her with a gesture, making clear that words couldn't erase what had happened. Michael remained motionless, crushed by shame and remorse. The public exposure had been a devastating blow, and now every gesture of repentance seemed to arrive too late. Some friends approached David to hug him and offer words of support. His courage and firmness in facing the betrayal inspired respect, and many were moved by his ability to maintain dignity. Other guests looked at Emma and Michael with disbelief and disapproval, understanding that the betrayal had marked a before and after in the family. No one would be able to forget what had just happened. David breathed deeply, feeling that, although the pain was intense, he had accomplished something important, facing the truth and recovering his strength before everyone. The mixture of emotions was overwhelming, but also liberating. David knew the exposure of betrayal was the first step toward his new life, where truth and dignity would be his guide. Once the initial tension decreased, David stepped back for a moment, observing around him. The party had lost its joy, but the clarity of truth filled every corner of the room. He remembered all the moments when he had fully trusted and how small signs had gone unnoticed. Now, everything made sense, and the betrayal was completely exposed. Seated, David reflected on the strength he had found to act with courage. Anger and sadness mixed, but he also felt a deep sensation of justice. Emma and Michael remained silent, facing the reality of their acts. The public exposure had been a blow they couldn't ignore, and David knew their paths couldn't cross again in the same way. The guests were starting to leave, some commenting among themselves about David's courage and the gravity of the betrayal. The party was over, but the lesson and impact of the truth would remain. David stood up, breathing deeply, feeling that every difficult moment had been worth it. He had protected his dignity and made clear that truth always prevails. Calm was beginning to return, and David understood that this day, though painful, marked a new beginning for him, free from lies and betrayals. Looking at his friends and family members who still remained, David decided to speak with a firm and serene voice. Today we learned that truth always finds its way, and that betrayal, however hidden, always comes to light. His words resonated in the room, reminding everyone of the importance of trust and honesty. Emotion was present on every face, and many felt a deep respect for his courage. David continued, "There's nothing more precious than truth and dignity. Although it hurts to face it, it always makes us stronger and guides us toward a better future." His friends looked at him with admiration, while Emma and Michael remained silent, aware they had lost something invaluable: David's trust and everyone's respect. The emotion of the day was still present, but David felt peace in his heart. He had faced the betrayal, protected his dignity, and taught everyone a lesson that would remain forever. And with a final sigh, looking at the horizon of his new life, he said to himself, "Truth can hurt, but it always frees the soul." If this story has touched you in any way, don't forget to comment below what you would do in David's place, and subscribe to continue following real stories that remind us of the importance of truth.